The stone turned 400 meters below her, and Dana Reyes heard it before she felt the cold. Not the wind, not the snow coming sideways off the ridge like it wanted to strip the skin off her face, but that one small sound underneath all of it, a flat granite stone rolling a quarter turn under the weight of a boot that did not want to be heard. Her left ear was a dead wet ringing nothing, blood crusting down the side of her jaw and freezing there, and the world on that side had gone to wool. But the right ear, the good ear, the one that had no business hearing anything in a storm like this, brought it to her clean as a struck bell. A boot. A man. Coming up. She did not move. That was the first thing, before the counting, before any of it. She lay against the granite slab with her cheek to the rock, and she did not move a muscle, because she had learned in the last hour that movement was sound and sound was the only currency left on this mountain, and she was not going to spend a single coin of it on flinching. The wind came in long pulls now, building and dropping, and in the spaces between the pulls the mountain talked to her. She had stopped fighting it. 2 hours ago, she had been a Marine corporal with a working body and a working radio and 7 men around her she could see and touch and curse at. And now she was a thing folded into a crack in the rock with one leg that would not answer when she called it, and a rib that ground against something every time she breathed. And the only thing she had left that worked better than it ever had in her life was the right side of her own skull. Funny, she thought, in the cold flat place her mind had gone to. You spend your whole life learning to shoot a thing you can see. Nobody teaches you the night you can't see anything at all. She breathed out slow through her teeth, the way she did when she wanted the world to get small and sharp, and she started counting. 1. The boot on the stone, for 100 meters, downslope and to the right, in the dead ground below the second ridge where the trail switched back on itself. She knew that ground. She had walked it 9 hours ago in daylight with her squad strung out ahead of her, and the sun on the snow so bright it hurt. That switchback was a 60-second climb for a man moving careful, 90 if he was moving quiet, and this man was moving quiet. 2. Higher up, off to her left where her dead ear couldn't help her, a different sound, lighter, the particular soft crunch of fresh snow under a foot that came down toe first. A second man and a better one. The first man was tired and cold and stepping flat. This one was placing his feet. This one had done it before. She filed them both away in the dark behind her eyes and kept listening, and the wind dropped all the way out for one held second, the way it does on a mountain right before it changes its mind. And in that 1 second of true silence, she heard the thing that made her stomach go to ice. Metal on metal. Small. Oiled. A bolt easing back slow against a spring. Slow enough that it would not click. Slow enough that a man 400 meters away in a screaming storm could never in 10 lifetimes hear it. But she heard it. She heard it, and she understood 3 things at once, the way you understand them in your body before your brain gets the words lined up. She understood that the men coming up the mountain were not coming up to look for survivors. She understood that the bolt easing back belonged to someone who already knew there was something up here worth chambering around for. And she understood, lying there with her blood freezing to the granite, and her leg gone and her rib grinding, that she was not the prey on this mountain tonight. She was the only one who could hear the trap. Now let me back this whole thing up. Because if I just drop you into that and walk away, you'll think it's a story about a girl with magic ears. And it isn't, and she'd be the first one to tell you so. Last name Reyes, first name Dana, Corporal, United States Marine Corps. I've got her file open here on the porch, and the rain's coming down off the gutter the way it does this time of morning, and Bishop's asleep on the boards by my boot, and I've read this thing through 4 times now, and I keep coming back to the same line. There's a line in here, in the after action, written by a captain who wasn't there, and it says the corporal was presumed killed in action and subsequently recovered. Presumed killed. That's the kind of sentence that gets typed by a man in a warm room. Subsequently recovered. Like she was a piece of gear that fell off a truck. What that sentence doesn't tell you is that for 1 hour and 40 minutes on a mountain in the Hindu Kush in the back half of winter, Dana Reyes was a dead woman who could hear everything. It doesn't tell you that a blast wave that should have ended her did something to her instead that no surgeon has ever been able to get back or fully explain. It doesn't tell you that 7 men walked off that mountain on their own 2 feet who absolutely would not have, if a girl they'd already grieved hadn't been lying in the rocks doing math with the only ear she had left. So I'm going to tell you what that sentence doesn't. Pour yourself something. Sit down. This one's got teeth. Here's what you have to understand about where she was, because the geography is the whole story. The Hindu Kush in winter is not a place that wants you. It is a country of black rock and blue ice stacked up so high the sky goes thin, and the weather doesn't roll in, it ambushes you. A clear, hard morning turning into a whiteout inside of 20 minutes with no apology and no warning. Dana's team was a recon element, 6 Marines and her attached as a linguist and a second set of eyes, working a ridge line above a valley where somebody with money had been moving somebody with rifles through the high passes that were supposed to be snowed shut. That was the job. Walk the high ground, watch the low ground, come home. Simple jobs are the ones that kill you, and every Marine on that ridge knew it, which is why they were good and careful and strung out at proper interval the way you're taught, and it didn't matter even a little bit. Because the men in the dead ground below the second ridge had been there longer than them. Had been there, in fact, since before first light, dug into the rock with the patience of people who live in that country and do not have anywhere warmer to be. And they let the recon team walk almost all the way through the kill zone before the first man on the trigger lost his nerve a half-second early, and that half-second, that one human half-second of a cold finger twitching before the order came, is the only reason any of this is a story about survivors at all. Dana was at the back of the file when the ridge came apart. Tail end, Charlie. The slot you put your linguist in, the safe slot. The one furthest from the front where everybody assumes the trouble lives. The first RPG went high and long. A streak of orange that lit the snow blue-white for half a heartbeat, and went over the lead element and hit the rock above and behind them. And that was the half-second mistake, that round going early and high, because it meant the men up front were still alive to drop and return fire instead of being gone in the first volley the way the ambush had drawn it up on paper. But it also meant that the back blast and the rock burst came down the line, came down toward the safe slot, came down toward Dana, and the world for her became a single white flat slap of pressure with no sound in it at all. I want to tell this part the way it actually happens to a body, not the way the movies do it, because the movies lie to you about this and the lie matters. There was no slow motion. There was no ringing that built up gentle. There was a hammer the size of the mountain, and it hit the left side of her head and her face and her chest all at once. And then there was nothing, a hole in the tape, a stretch of time that simply does not exist in her memory and never will. When the tape starts again, she is on her back in the snow 8 feet downslope from where she'd been standing, looking straight up into the falling snow, and her mouth is full of the taste of a battery, copper and salt and something burnt, and her left ear is pouring warmth down her neck, and she cannot hear the firefight that she can see lighting up the rock above her in stutters and flashes. She can see it. Muzzle flash off the granite, the strobe of it, her squad somewhere up the slope putting round back downhill. She can see all of it, and she cannot hear one single piece of it, and that silence with the violence still flashing in it, is the most frightening thing that has ever happened to her, more than the blast, more than the blood, because a Marine without her hearing in a firefight is a Marine who has lost the one sense that tells her where to die. She tried to get up. This is in the part she remembers. She got a hand under herself, the right hand, and she pushed, and her left leg sent up a white sheet of wrong that folded her right back down into the snow. Something in the thigh, deep, not the bone snapped clean, but the meat of it torn, and the leg simply not willing to take her weight, and a rib on the same side that announced itself the second she tried to breathe deep. So she did not get up. She lay back down because her body made the decision for her, and that, as it turns out, is the second reason she's alive. Because 3 feet above where her head had been a round came through the air a second later that would have taken her in the throat if she'd made it to her knees. She didn't hear that round. She felt the snap of it part the air over her face. And lying there, deaf and bleeding and pinned, with the snow filling her open eyes faster than they could blink it away, Dana Reyes did the only useful thing left to her, which was to roll. She rolled downhill and to her right, off the open slope where the rounds were finding the snow in little black puffs, and she got herself behind the granite slab that was going to be her whole world for the next 100 minutes, and she pressed her back to it, and she shook. Now here is where the squad disappears from her, and I need you to sit in the wrongness of it for a second the way she had to. Up the slope, her 7 brothers were fighting for their lives and giving better than they got, and the team leader, a staff sergeant named Cole, who you'll hear more about, made the only call he could make. The whiteout was closing in hard, visibility dropping by the second, and he had a casualty count to take and a withdrawal to run and a radio call for fire to make, and the last anybody had seen of Dana Reyes was the corporal at the back of the file standing exactly where the rock burst had come down, and then not standing there anymore. Gone. Off the slope. Into the white. Cole called her name twice on the squad net. Twice. I've got the transcript. Reyes, you up. And there was nothing, because the radio that would have answered him was lying in the snow 8 feet from where she'd been thrown with its housing cracked, and because even if she'd had it in her hand, she could not have heard him say her name. And a staff sergeant in a closing whiteout with men still taking fire does not get to spend the lives of 7 to search the snow for one he has every reason in the world to believe is already gone. So he made the call that every honest soldier dreads and every honest soldier would make, and he marked her, in his own head, in the cold ledger you keep in combat, as killed. And he got his living men up and moving, and he ran the withdrawal up and over the back of the ridge into the dead ground on the far side, away from her, into the storm, and the sound of the firefight that Dana couldn't hear anyway moved up and over the rock and away, and within 10 minutes the mountain belonged to two things only: the men coming up to confirm their kills, and the dead woman behind the granite slab, who was just now starting to hear again. Now I want to stop right here and tell you about the thing in her head, because if I don't, the rest of this won't make sense, and worse, you won't believe it, and it happens to be true. Folks hear a story like this, and they want it to be magic. They want the wounded girl who can hear ghosts. I've seen the comments on stories like this, and somebody always wants it to be a miracle, because a miracle is comfortable. A miracle means it could never happen to you, and you don't have to think about it. But what happened to Dana Reyes wasn't a miracle. It was an injury, and the injury is more interesting than any miracle because it's real, and it's got a name. When a blast wave hits the side of your head, it does something to the inner ear that the doctors call acoustic trauma, and most of the time it just means you lose hearing, partial or total, in the ear that took the hit. That's what happened to her left ear. Gone. Dead. A wet ringing nothing that would, in time, become a permanent partial deafness she carries to this day. But sometimes, and the science on this is still thin because you can't exactly run experiments on it, sometimes when one ear goes dead, the brain does something violent to compensate. It cranks the gain on what's left. It's called hyperacusis, and most people who get it hate it because it turns the world into an assault. A dripping faucet becomes a hammer. A closing door becomes a gunshot. The ordinary noise of a kitchen becomes physically painful. The brain, trying to fix a hole, overcorrects and turns the volume of everything to maximum. For most people, that's a curse. For one night, on one mountain, for one woman who had been trained for 15 years to take in information and act on it and stay alive, it was the only weapon she had left. Because here's the part the doctors don't put in the textbook. It wasn't just louder. The brain doesn't only crank the volume, it gets hungry for the signal. It starts pulling sound out of noise the way you can pick a single voice out of a crowded room when somebody says your name. Dana's brain, with one ear dead and the other one screaming, with no firefight to process, and no orders to follow, and nothing in the whole world to do but lie behind a rock and survive, turned itself into the finest listening instrument the United States Marine Corps ever fielded by accident. She wasn't hearing ghosts. She was hearing everything. The wind across granite and the wind across cloth. A boot coming down flat and a boot coming down toe first. A bolt easing back slow 400 meters out in a storm. That's not magic. That's a wound that turned into an edge. And I've thought a lot about that on this porch, friend, because that's the whole shape of every story I tell you up here. These women didn't have superpowers. They had damage, and they had training, and somewhere in the worst hour of their lives the two of those things fused into something that saved them. Dana would tell you herself, and she did tell the doctors, that she'd trade the ear back in a heartbeat. She'd give it all up to have her hearing whole again, and to never have learned what a mountain sounds like when it's full of men who want to kill you. She didn't get that choice. None of them do. The choice she got was simpler and meaner. Use it or die quiet. Now, if you've ever lain awake in the dark and heard your own house tick and settle and convinced yourself it was footsteps, You know something about what the next 100 minutes were like for her, except that for her they weren't her imagination. Every sound was real. Every sound was a man. And before I take you back down into that rock with her, do me one favor. If you're getting something out of this, if you want to keep hearing the stories the after action reports leave out, go on and hit that subscribe button. There's a new one every week, and I read every file the same way, slow, on this porch, with the rain coming down. All right, back to the mountain. The first thing she did behind the rock was take inventory, and she did it the way you're trained to do it, which is to start at your own body and work outward, because panic comes from the unknown, and the cure for panic is making the unknown into a list. Left ear gone. Right ear working too well, ringing high under everything but pulling sound the way a magnet pulls filings. Left leg, the thigh, torn deep through the meat, not arterial because she was still conscious and not getting cold faster than the air around her was making her cold, but not going to carry her anywhere, not tonight, maybe not for a long time. Left side, a rib, cracked or broken, a hot wire that lit up every time she pulled a breath past half. Hands working. Right leg working. Eyes working, though there was nothing to see but the white coming sideways, and the black rock, and the gray going dark as the last of the daylight bled out of the storm. Then the gear. This is the part that kept her alive in the boring way, the unglamorous way, the way nobody puts in the trailer. She had not lost her pack when she was thrown, because she'd been wearing it high and tight the way her first team leader had screamed at her to wear it 8 years before, and inside the pack, against her back, frozen but intact, was the thing that meant she wasn't going to freeze to death in the next 3 hours, which was a casualty blanket. The cheap crinkling silver and orange kind that costs $4 and has saved more lives than every wonder drug ever invented. She got it out one-handed, slow, working by feel inside the pack so she wouldn't have to move her body, and she pulled it around herself under her chest rig, against the skin where it would catch her own heat and throw it back, and she did all of this without making more sound than the wind was already making. Because she had already understood the rule of the night, and she was already living by it. Sound was currency. She had a finite amount of it. Every move she made spent some. She was going to spend none she didn't have to. She had her sidearm, a pistol, on her right thigh where her hand could find it, and she had what was in the magazine and one spare, and that was the whole of her ability to reach out and touch the world tonight, because her rifle was gone, up the slope somewhere in the snow where she'd been thrown, and there was no getting it. A pistol on a mountain against rifles is not a weapon. It's a last sentence. She knew that. She put her right hand on it anyway, flat, just resting, the way you rest your hand on a thing you're not going to use, but want to know is there, and she settled her back against the granite, and she closed her eyes, because her eyes were no good to her in this, and they were only stealing energy and attention from the one sense that was, and she listened. The mountain came in. I want to slow all the way down here because this is the heart of it. This is the thing I've never been able to stop thinking about since I first read this file. And it's the thing that no movie will ever get right because you can't film it. There's no picture of a woman lying still in the dark. It looks like nothing. But inside that nothing, Dana Reyes was reading the whole mountain like a blind woman reading a page with her fingers, and the page was made of sound. The wind was her baseline. She learned it first, the way you learn the hum of a room before you can hear the whisper in it. The wind on this ridge had a voice, and the voice changed depending on what it crossed. Over open granite, it was a clean high hiss, almost a whistle where it found an edge. Through the gap in the rocks 20 feet to her left, it dropped into a low moan. And when it crossed something soft, something woven, something that wasn't rock, it made a different sound entirely, a kind of muffled flutter, a snap of fabric, and that, she realized lying there, that was the sound that was going to keep her alive. Because rock doesn't wear a jacket, and the wind told the truth about the difference. Then, under the wind, the men. The first one she'd already heard, down at the switchback, for 100 meters, the tired one stepping flat. Now she heard him again, closer, 350, and she heard the second one too, the good one, the one who placed his feet off to the left and slightly higher, moving on a line that would bring him up the spine of the ridge. And as she lay there with her eyes shut and her breath coming slow and shallow through her teeth, a third sound resolved out of the noise, and then a fourth, and Dana Reyes did the thing that she would never be able to fully explain to the people who debriefed her afterward, the thing that turned a wounded deaf woman into the most important set of ears on that mountain. She started doing the math. 4 men. She had 4 distinct signatures now, and she held them apart in her mind the way a conductor holds 4 instruments. Man 1, the tired one, flat-footed, downslope right, slowest, 300 meters, and closing at maybe 100 meters every 2 minutes in this terrain, which meant 6 minutes to her position if he came straight. But he wasn't coming straight, he was sweeping. She could hear him pause and shift and pause, clearing ground. Man 2, the careful one, left and high, faster but quieter, the dangerous one, the one she'd never hear if the wind picked the wrong moment. Man 3, somewhere in the middle, heavier, and here is the detail she caught that I want you to hold on to. Here is the small thing, because there's always a small thing. Man 3 came down heavier on his left boot than his right. A drag, a hitch, a half beat of extra weight on the left, every other step. He was limping. Somebody had hurt their leg, or it was old, an old wound, a bad knee on a cold mountain, and it didn't matter which, because what it meant was that man 3 was the slowest to turn and the slowest to climb and the easiest to hear coming, and Dana filed the limping man away as the one she'd know in the dark no matter what the wind did. Man 4 she only caught twice and then lost, and the losing of him scared her more than the hearing of the other 3, because a man you can't hear is a man who's doing it on purpose. Here is the math she was actually running, and I want to lay it out flat the way she ran it, because this is the thing that separates a trained Marine from a frightened person in the dark. A frightened person hears 4 men and thinks 4 men are coming to kill me. A Marine hears 4 men and thinks 4 men, spread on a front about 100 meters wide, sweeping uphill, which means they don't know exactly where I am, which means they think they're clearing, not hunting a known location, which means I have not been seen, which means the only way I die in the next 10 minutes is if I make a sound or one of them steps on me. And the careful one, man 2, the dangerous one, is on a line that will pass about 40 meters to my left if he holds it, close enough to hear me breathe wrong, too far to see me if I don't move. 40 meters. That was the number. 40 meters of darkness and driving snow between her, and the only one of the four who frightened her. And the whole rest of the night was going to be about keeping those 40 meters full of nothing but wind. She had no watch she could look at without moving her arm into her sight line and risking the small glow of the dial. So she counted time the way you do when you can't see a clock, in breaths, slow ones, for seconds in, hold, 6 seconds out, and she ran a count in the back of her mind under the listening, and she made herself a deal. She would not move until she had to. She would not draw the pistol until a man was inside 10 meters, because a pistol drawn early is a panic she couldn't afford, and a pistol fired at all was the end of everything. The announcement, the flare, the thing that turned her from a ghost they couldn't find into a muzzle flash they could all shoot at. The pistol was for one thing only, for the last thing, for the man who actually stepped on her, and not 1 second before. So she lay there, and she spent her breaths, and she kept the 40 meters empty with the only tool she had, which was knowing exactly where every man was at every second, and moving her own stillness, if that makes sense, leaning the angle of her body a half-inch this way or that behind the rock so that the bulk of the granite stayed between her and the careful one as his line crept past. She was hiding behind a rock from a man she could not see, using only the sound of his boots to know which side of the rock to be on. And it worked. The careful one passed at 38 meters. She'd been 2 off, close enough that for 9 full seconds she could hear him breathing, slow controlled breaths through the nose, a professional's breathing. And she stopped her own breath entirely for those 9 seconds and lay with her lungs locked and her heart slamming against the broken rib and her hand flat on the pistol she wasn't going to draw. And she listened to a man who wanted her dead breathe his way past her in the dark and never know she was 3 steps off his left shoulder. And then he was gone, up the slope, his line carrying him away, and she let the breath out through her teeth so slow it made no sound at all, and the 40 meters filled back up with wind, and she was still alive, and she had not spent a single coin. That was the first one. There were going to be a lot more, and the night had barely started, and somewhere up the back of the ridge in the storm, 7 men who thought she was dead were digging in to wait out the weather before they came back at dawn to bring her body home. Right into the ground she'd just spent an hour learning by ear. Sit with that a second before I go on. She's bleeding into the snow. Can't feel her left foot anymore. A broken rib biting her every time she breathes, and she's running trigonometry with her ears. Most people, and I mean most good people, most brave people, lock up in the dark. The dark is the oldest fear there is, older than fire, and you put a person alone and hurt in the dark with men hunting them, and the body wants to do one of 2 things. It wants to run or it wants to freeze, and both of those get you killed. Dana did neither. She did the hardest thing a frightened animal can do, which is to get quiet. Quiet enough to think. Quiet enough to let the mountain tell her the truth instead of telling herself a story. I've known men with 20 years and who couldn't do what that corporal did in her first hour as a dead woman. And I think about why, and the only answer I've ever come to is that she stopped trying to survive and started trying to understand. And understanding is the only thing that's ever beaten fear on a mountain or anywhere else. All right. The careful one was gone up the slope, but the other 3 were still down there, and the limping man was getting closer, and the night had a long way left to run. The 4 men swept up past her position over the next 40 minutes, and Dana tracked every one of them the whole way. And I want to walk you through how she did it, because by now her brain had stopped doing the math consciously and started doing it the way you drive a familiar road, automatic, the hands knowing the wheel. She had a map in her head, a sound map, and the 4 signatures moved across it like pieces on a board. The careful one, gone high and now somewhere up near the crest, faint. The tired, flat-footed one, working the middle, the easiest to hold. The limping man, drifting right, down slope, that hitch in his left boot a metronome she could find in any wind. And the silent 4th, the one she'd lost and found and lost again, the one that made the back of her neck go cold every time he dropped off her map. Because a man you can't hear is a man who has either gone still on purpose or gotten close enough that the wind is eating him. And then, while she was holding all 4 of them in her head, the world changed shape on her, because a 5th sound came up the mountain that did not belong to any of the men sweeping the slope. It came from below and behind them, from down in the valley, a different texture entirely, mechanical, low, a diesel idle carried up on a downdraft and then snatched away, then back. A vehicle, maybe 2. Down at the foot of the trail where the dead ground met the wadi, somebody had brought up trucks, and trucks meant this was not 4 men out for a walk, trucks meant organization, trucks meant the men on the slope were the forward edge of something bigger, and trucks meant, when she turned it over, that the firefight her squad had walked into hadn't been a chance ambush by a handful of fighters. It had been a position. A held position, manned and supplied and waiting, on a trail that was supposed to be snowed shut, which meant the trail wasn't shut, which meant the intelligence that had sent her team up here had been wrong about the one thing that mattered, and which meant lying behind her rock with the diesel coming and going on the wind. That Dana Reyes now knew something that the 7 living men on the back of the ridge did not. She knew the strength and the shape of the thing they had stumbled into. She knew it wasn't over. And she had no way on God's earth to tell them, because her radio was a cracked plastic shell 8 feet up the open slope in the snow, in the dead ground, in the kill zone, between her and 4 armed men. This is the part where most stories would give her a moment of despair, and I'm sure she had one, anybody would, but it's not in the file, and she never spoke about it, and I think the reason is that she didn't have time for it. Despair is a luxury of people who are safe enough to feel sorry for themselves. Dana had a problem, and the problem had a shape, and her whole training and her whole nature was to take a problem with a shape and start chipping at the edges of it. The radio was the answer. The radio was 8 feet away. 8 feet of open snow that a man might cross in 2 seconds standing up, and that a woman with a dead leg and a broken rib was going to have to cross flat on her belly, silent, with 4 armed men on the slope, and at least one of them, the silent 4th, possibly close enough to hear a buckle scrape. She did the math on that too, and the math was ugly. 8 feet. Call it 3 minutes if she did it right, an inch at a time, freezing between every movement to listen. 3 minutes of being out from behind the only cover she had, on the open ground, in the kill zone, where the rounds had been finding the snow an hour before. 3 minutes during which the careful one could come back down his own track, or the silent 4th could materialize out of the white, or the limping man could swing his sweep 10 meters wide of where she expected and walk right into her. 3 minutes was an eternity. 3 minutes was a coin so big she almost couldn't bear to spend it. And the radio might be dead anyway. The housing was cracked, she'd seen it, and a cracked housing on a mountain in a blizzard was very likely a dead radio, and then she'd have spent the biggest coin of the night on nothing. So she didn't go. Not yet. She made herself wait, and waiting when every nerve is screaming go is its own kind of courage that nobody gives medals for. She waited until she had the slope red cold, until she knew where all 4 of them were and where they were headed, until there was a window, a real one, a stretch of 2 or 3 minutes where the careful one was up at the crest and the tired one was working away to the left and the limping man was downslope and the silent fourth she finally pinned. Because even a silent man has to breathe, and even a silent man's gear has a voice if you listen long enough. And she found him at last, far right, low, almost down to the trucks, the furthest of all of them from her rock. The window was open. All 4 were as far from the radio as they were going to get. It was now or it was not at all. And Dana Reyes, dead woman, 8 years a Marine, started to crawl. I have crawled under fire exactly twice in my life, and I will tell you that everything you think you know about it from the movies is wrong. It is not fast. It is not a low athletic scramble. It is the slowest, most humiliating, most terrifying thing a body can do, dragging yourself forward on your forearms an inch at a time with the whole sky pressing down on you and every instinct you own howling at you to get up and run, because standing up and running feels like control and crawling feels like surrender. And the crawling is the thing that keeps you alive, and the running is the thing that kills you. Now take that, and take away one of her legs, and take away half her hearing, and add a broken rib that ground bone on bone with every pull of her arms, and add the absolute requirement of total silence, not the relative quiet of a normal crawl, but the silence of a thing that cannot afford one scrape of one buckle, and you start to get somewhere near what those 8 feet cost her. She moved on the exhales. She'd figured this out without deciding to, the way the body figures out the smart thing when the stakes are high enough. The wind came in pulls, and on the building pull, when it was loudest, she moved 6 inches, 8, dragging the dead leg behind her like a thing that belonged to someone else, and on the dying pull, when the wind dropped and the mountain went quiet and her own small sounds would have carried, she froze, flat, cheek in the snow, and she listened, and she found her 4 men on the map again. All 4, every time, before she let herself move another inch. Building pull, move. Dying pull, freeze and listen. Building pull, move. It took her not 3 minutes, but nearly 7 minutes to cross 8 feet of snow, and somewhere in the middle of it her bare right hand closed on the cracked plastic housing of her radio, and she nearly wept, not from fear, and not from relief, but from the sheer animal effort of having gotten there. And she did not weep, because weeping has a sound. And she pulled the radio in against her chest and began the longest crawl back. The radio was not dead. This is the small mercy in a story that doesn't have many. The housing was cracked, but the guts of it were intact, and when she got herself back behind the granite slab and shielded the faceplate against her body and risked the tiniest press of a button, a single green light came up under her cupped hand, dim as a dying star, and Dana Reyes had a voice again. She had a way to reach the 7 men on the back of the ridge. She had a way to tell them about the trucks, and the held position, and the shape of the thing. And the second she keyed that radio to transmit, she would tell the men on the slope exactly where she was. This is the choice. This is the whole story folding down to a single point, the way these stories always do. Every transmission is a beacon. Not just the sound of her voice, which she could keep to the barest whisper, but the radio itself, the burst of energy going out into the dark. And these were not unsophisticated men. These were men with trucks and held positions and patience. And the careful one, the one who placed his feet. The kind of man who runs an operation like this is exactly the kind of man who has something in a truck that can tell him there's a friendly radio transmitting from a slope where there are supposed to be only corpses. She didn't know for certain they could locate her. But she knew enough to know she couldn't assume they couldn't, and she knew that even without any equipment at all, the human ear, even an ordinary one, can rough out the direction of a sound, and 4 men on a quiet slope with one of them transmitting nearby would have a line on her inside of 2 transmissions. So the math was this, and it was the worst math of the night. Stay silent and live. Keep the radio dark, keep behind the rock, let the 4 men finish their sweep and go back down to their trucks, and wait for the dawn and the storm to break and her own people, who thought she was dead, to maybe, possibly come back. That was the path where Dana Reyes survived. It was a real path, and it was the smart path, and any instructor in the world would have told her to take it. Or, key the radio. Tell the 7 living men what she knew. Warn them about the position and the trucks and the shape of it, the thing they couldn't see and didn't know, and were going to walk back into a dawn when they came for her body. And in the keying of it, in the warning of it, give up her position to the 4 armed men on the slope, and trade her one real path to survival for theirs. She lay there with the dim green light cupped under her hand, and the choice sitting on her chest heavier than the rib. And I'll tell you what she didn't know, what made it even worse, which is that she didn't know if the warning was even necessary. Maybe her squad already knew. Maybe Cole had eyes on the trucks from the back of the ridge. Maybe the whole thing was already in a report, and a drone was already turning toward the valley, and her transmission would change nothing except to get her killed. She was being asked to spend her life on a maybe, to give up a certain survival for an uncertain warning. That's not the clean choice they put in the movies, the obvious noble sacrifice with the swelling music. That's a real choice, a foggy one, a choice you make in the dark with bad information and your own death in one hand and somebody else's maybe death in the other, and you will never, ever know if you got it right. Dana Reyes keyed the radio. She keyed it low, and she keyed it short, and she pressed her lips almost to the housing, and she said the only words that mattered first, in case it was the only transmission she got off before they found her. And the words were, "Any element this net, this is Reyes, I am alive. Do not approach the second ridge. Enemy in dead ground, multiple. With vehicles in the wadi, it is a held position. Say again held position. Do not come for me at first light. You will walk into it." And then she let go of the key, and she went absolutely still, and she listened with everything she had, and she listened in 2 directions at once, up the back of the ridge for an answer, and across the slope for the cost. The cost came first. The careful one stopped moving. She heard it, or rather she heard the absence of it, the place on her sound map where there had been the faint regular crunch of a man placing his feet up near the crest, And now there was nothing, a held breath in the rhythm of the night. And a man who stops the instant a radio transmits is a man who heard the radio. He'd heard it. Not the words. She was sure of that. She'd kept it too low and too short, and the wind was too loud for the words. But the burst itself, the texture of a transmission cutting across the storm, and he had stopped, and she could feel through the soles of her own listening that he had turned. That the whole attention of the most dangerous man on the mountain had just swung around and pointed itself down the slope toward a sound that was not supposed to be there. She had spent the coin. There was no getting it back. And then, sweeter than anything she had ever heard, under the wind and the ringing and the slamming of her own heart, the radio in her hand crackled, and a voice came through it, thin and torn by static, but a voice, a human voice, an American voice, and it was Cole, Staff Sergeant Cole, and what he said was, "Reyes, Cole, good copy on held position. We are eyes on the vehicles. Hold what you got. We are coming for you. Do not, I say again, do not transmit. They have a fix. We will find you. Cole out." She almost laughed. She lay in the snow with her dead leg and her broken rib, and a man stalking toward her through a blizzard, and she almost laughed out loud. Because the warning hadn't been necessary. Cole already knew about the trucks. She'd spent the biggest coin of the night to tell him a thing he already knew. The matey had broken the wrong way. She'd given up her position for nothing. Except it wasn't for nothing. And this is the thing she didn't understand in that first crushed second and only understood later. And it's the thing that makes this whole story turn. So stay with me. Cole had told her two things in that transmission. He'd told her they were coming for her, which meant her own people were now moving, in the storm, toward a slope crawling with 4 armed men. And he told her do not transmit, they have a fix, which meant Cole knew the enemy could locate a radio and was warning her off it. But Cole was up on the back of the ridge with 6 tired wounded men and a map and a radio in the dark, and Cole could not see the 4 men on the slope, and Cole could not hear them, and Cole had no idea, no possible way to know, that one of the 4 was already turning, already coming, already fixing the spot where she lay. And Dana could hear all 4 of them. Every one. She had the whole board. Cole was about to bring 6 men down a slope in the dark to rescue one, and he was going to bring them down blind, into a kill zone he couldn't see, against an enemy he couldn't hear, and the only person on that entire mountain who could see the board, who could tell him where every threat stood and which way it faced, and how fast it was moving, was the wounded woman they were coming to save. The rescue was about to walk into the same trap the ambush had been built on, unless the bait could see for them. She made the second decision of the night faster than the first, because the first one had been about her own life, and this one was about theirs, and that, it turns out, is a much easier kind of math. That's the kind of math a Marine can do in her sleep. She keyed the radio again, and she ignored Cole's order not to transmit, and she did it knowing the careful one was already homing on her, because the careful one was now the smallest of her problems. She keyed it, and she said, "Cole, Reyes, negative on your approach. Do not come down the front of the ridge. I have ears on 4 enemy on the slope between you and me. I can track them. Do you copy? I can track them. I will talk you in. Come down the east finger, not the front, and stand by for my count." There was a silence on the net that she filled with listening. The careful one was moving again now, downslope, toward her, slow, a hunter who has a rough line and is closing it carefully. 200 meters. The limping man, far right and low, had stopped and turned too, the hitch in his boot gone still, listening. The tired flat-footed one was the only one who hadn't reacted, still working the middle, oblivious, the weak link. And the silent fourth, down near the trucks, she'd lost him again in the worst possible moment, and she made a note of the hole in her map and kept going. Cole's voice came back, and there was something different in it now, and I've thought about what that difference was, and I think it was a man recalibrating in real time everything he thought he knew about the situation and the person he was talking to. Reyes, he said, slower, say again your last. You can track them how? I can hear them, she said. I lost my left ear in the blast. I can hear everything on the other side. There are 4. I have 3 of them fixed, and I'm working the 4th. Cole, I can keep you out of it. Let me keep you out of it. Come down the east finger, and I will call every man on this slope to you before you ever lay eyes on him. Do you copy? And there was another silence, shorter, and then Cole said the thing that told her he'd decided to believe her, and deciding to believe a wounded woman's account of an injury that turns deafness into a superpower on the strength of nothing but her voice on a torn net in a storm is its own kind of courage too, the courage to trust, which is rarer in combat than the courage to fight. Copy, Cole said. East finger. 6 of us moving. You are our eyes. Talk to us, Reyes. Don't stop talking. So she didn't stop talking. And here is where the story becomes the thing it was always going to become, where the bait becomes the gun, where the dead woman becomes the most important Marine on the mountain, and I want to tell it to you the way it happened, in her voice, in the count, because the count is the most extraordinary thing I have ever read in any file in all my years of reading them. She started with the careful one, because he was the immediate threat, the one closing on her own position, and she made a decision that took my breath away when I understood it, which was that she was going to use herself as the fixed point. The careful one was coming toward her. Fine. She would let him keep coming toward her, because every meter he came toward her was a meter he moved away from the east finger where her own people were now picking their way down in the dark, and a man fixed on a radio he thinks belongs to a wounded straggler is a man not watching the finger where the real threat is coming from. She was drawing him. The bait was working itself on purpose. She lay there and let the most dangerous man on the mountain stalk closer and closer to her, 150 meters, 120, and she fed his position to Cole the whole way. Careful one is moving to me. He's off your line. He's mine. Keep coming. And she did not let herself think about what would happen when the careful one closed the last 100 meters and found her. Because that was a problem for later, and the night was full of problems for now. Then the limping man. Limping man, you're 2 o'clock, 200 meters, downslope of you. He's stopped. He's facing the valley. He hasn't made you. Keep your interval and ease past him high. And she heard, faintly, far off, the soft, careful sounds of 6 men adjusting their movement on a slope in response to a voice in their ears. And she felt something she had no business feeling in that situation. She felt useful. She felt like a Marine again instead of a casualty. She felt the thing that she would later say was the only thing that kept her warm that night, which was that her brothers were moving by her word and living by her ears. And then the tired one, the oblivious one, the flat-footed man working the middle who hadn't reacted to any of it. And this is where the math got sharp and cold, because the tired one was working a line that was going to bring him right across the east finger, right across the path of her own people coming down, and he didn't know they were there, and they didn't know he was there. And the two of them were closing on the same patch of black rock in the dark, and only Dana, lying 200 meters away with one ear, could see the collision coming. She keyed the radio. "Cole," she said. "Stop. Everybody stop. There's a man crossing your front. You're 11 o'clock, 60 meters, coming left to right. Slow, he doesn't know you're there. Hold your fire and hold your feet. Let him pass. Do not engage. I say again, do not engage. If you fire, you tell the other three exactly where you are, and you lose the only advantage you have, which is me. Hold. And wait for my count." And the slope went still. 6 men froze in the dark on a finger of black rock with an enemy fighter walking across their front 60 meters away, and they held their fire, and they held their feet. 6 trained Marines with their fingers off their triggers, trusting a voice in their ears, trusting a wounded woman 200 meters away to tell them when a man they could half see in the snow was going to turn and find them. And Dana lay there with the careful one closing on her from one side, and the whole rescue frozen on the other, and she did the hardest thing she did all night, which was to wait, and to listen, and to time it. The flat-footed man crossed their front. She heard every step. She heard him pause once, halfway, and her heart stopped, because a pause is a man who heard something, and she keyed the radio and breathed, "Nobody move, nobody breathe," and she heard the pause stretch out, 2 seconds, 3, the tired man standing in the snow 60 meters from 6 rifles, turning his head, listening, and then she heard the step resume, flat, tired, oblivious, the man moving on. Away, off to the right and gone, and she let the air out of her body and keyed the radio and said clear, "He's past you, he's moving away, give him 30 seconds and then come down soft," and the slope unfroze, and 6 men breathed again, and the rescue kept coming. But the careful one was now 90 meters from her and closing. She had run out of room to spin him. She'd drawn him as far as the drawing was going to work. He was on her line now, a rough one, but a real one, moving slow and deliberate down the slope toward the spot where her radio had spoken. And he was good, he was so good, he was the kind of man who would close the last 90 meters and quarter the ground and find her behind her rock and put a round into her before her hand cleared the pistol. Because a pistol against a rifle at 5 meters in the hands of a man who placed his feet was not a fight. It was an execution with one extra step. She knew that. She'd known it since she first heard him breathe past her at 38 meters an hour ago. And she made the third decision of the night, the last one, the one that the whole night had been bending toward without her knowing it. And it was the kind of decision that you can only make when you have already decided, somewhere underneath, that you are probably going to die, and the only question left is whether you die for nothing or for something. She keyed the radio one more time, and she did it knowing it would bring the careful one straight to her, and she said, "Cole, the careful one is on me, 90 meters and closing. I can't move, and I can't lose him. He's going to find me. When he does, there's going to be noise. When you hear the noise, you'll have maybe 10 seconds while the other two orient on it, and in those 10 seconds you take the ease finger, and you get off this slope. Do you copy? You do not come for me. You use the noise and you go. That's an order from a corporal to a staff sergeant, and I know how that sounds, and I don't care. You go, Cole, you take your men and you go." And Cole came back, and his voice was tight, and he said, "Negative, Reyes, that is a negative. We do not leave you. We are 40 meters from you on the finger. We are coming. Hold on. Just hold on." 40 meters. He was 40 meters away. She hadn't known. She'd been so locked on the careful one and the tired one that she'd lost the precise track of her own people in the last minutes. And now the math reshuffled itself in an instant, and a new picture came up, and it was a terrible, beautiful knife-edge picture, and she saw the whole thing in one piece, the way you see the answer to something you've been working at for an hour. Cole's 6 were 40 meters off, on the east finger, below and to her right. The careful one was 90 meters off, above and to her left, closing on her. If the careful one kept coming, he would pass between her position and the finger. He would cross in front of Cole's 6 at close range, in the dark, not knowing they were there, fixed entirely on the radio sound that was her. The most dangerous man on the mountain was about to walk across the muzzles of 6 American rifles, and he didn't know it, because the only person who could see both halves of the board was lying in the snow between them with a dead leg and a broken rib and one ear. She didn't need the pistol. She'd never needed the pistol. The pistol had been a story she told herself about the last man and the last second, and the real weapon, the only weapon she'd had all night, was the same one it had always been. She could see in the dark, with her ears, and she could put the most dangerous man on the mountain exactly where 6 rifles were waiting, and she could do it with 3 words, and the only cost was that those same 3 words would tell the careful one precisely where she lay, and he was already coming for her anyway, so there was no cost at all. There was only the spending of a coin she'd already spent. She waited. God, the discipline of it. She waited. She let the careful one come. 80 meters, 70. She tracked him down to the meter. She felt the angle of him relative to the finger. She did the geometry in the dark with her one ear. And she waited until he was at the exact point where his line down to her crossed in front of Cole's 6 at a range where even tired wounded men in a blizzard could not miss. And then Dana Reyes keyed the radio for the last time, and she said, calm, flat, the calm of a woman who has already let go of the part of her that wanted to live. She said, Cole, you're 10 o'clock, 50 meters, 1 man. Moving right to left. That's the careful one. That's the dangerous one. He's broadside to you, and he doesn't know you're there. Take him. Take him now. And the slope came apart in light. I've heard a lot of men describe a lot of firefights, and they all reach for the same words, and the words are always wrong because there are no right ones. But the thing they all say, everyone, is that it's faster than you can believe and slower than you can bear, both at once. 6 rifles opened up on the east finger at 50 meters on a broadside target who never knew they were there, and the careful one, the man who placed his feet, the man who'd breathed past Dana at 38 meters 2 hours before and never known she was there, went down in the first half second and did not get up. And the muzzle flashes lit the snow blue-white in a stutter that Dana could see strobing on the rock above her, the same blue-white that had lit the night 2 hours ago when this all began, except this time it was her people's guns and her people's light and her word that had aimed it. And then the 10 seconds she'd promised Cole, the 10 seconds while the other 2 oriented on the noise, Those 10 seconds happened, and Dana was already talking through them, already feeding the board. Limping man is up. He's moving to the sound. You're 2 o'clock now, 100 meters, coming to you, and the silent fourth. She'd found him at last. The silent fourth was running up from the trucks toward the firefight, and she called him too. You're 1 o'clock. Low, 150, moving fast. That's the fourth. And Cole's 6. Instead of being a rescue party stumbling blind into a kill zone, we're a fire team with a God's eye view. We're 6 rifles being walked onto every thread on the slope by a voice that could not miss because it could hear everything, and the trap that had been built to kill them turned inside out and became a trap that killed the men who'd built it, and it was Dana Reyes, the corporal in the safe slot at the back of the file, the dead woman, the bait, who turned it. The limping man died 40 meters short of the finger, calling out to the careful one who couldn't answer. The silent fourth, the one who'd scared her most, the one who dropped off her map all night, made it furthest, made it almost up to Cole's position before 2 of Cole's Marines, talked onto him by Dana's count, caught him in a crossfire in the rocks. The tired, flat-footed man, the oblivious one, the weak link, was the only one of the 4 who lived, because he was the furthest away when it started, and he was smart enough or scared enough to do the one thing that kept him alive, which was to drop his weapon and lie down in the snow and not move, the same thing Dana had done at the start. And there's something in that I've never stopped turning over, that the only enemy who lived was the one who learned the same lesson she had, that on that mountain on that night the thing that killed you was moving, and the thing that saved you was stillness. It was over in under 2 minutes. 2 minutes after 100 minutes of the most patient, agonizing, inch-by-inch survival I've ever read about. That's how it goes. The waiting is the war, and the fighting is the punctuation. And then there was the sound that Dana said she would remember longer than any of the rest of it, longer than the blast, longer than the careful one's breathing, longer than the radio crackle, and it was the sound of boots coming up the slope toward her, not to kill her, but to find her. 6 pairs of boots, friendly boots, and a voice, Cole's voice. Not on the radio now, but in the air, real close. Calling her name into the storm, Reyes, Reyes, and she found, when she tried to answer, that she could not make her voice work, that the thing that had kept her silent for 100 minutes would not switch back off, and so she did the only thing she could. She reached up with her bare right hand, and she scraped her fingernails across the granite slab, 3 times, scratch, scratch, scratch. A sound so small that no ordinary person would have heard it over the wind. But Cole had spent the last hour learning to trust her ears. And maybe some of it had rubbed off, or maybe he was just listening the way you listen when you're hunting for someone you've already grieved and dared to hope you were wrong about, because he stopped, and he turned, and he came to the rock, and he found her behind it, alive, wrapped in a $4 silver blanket with her dead leg and her broken rib, and her one ear and her empty pistol still holstered, never drawn, never needed. The first thing she said to him, when her voice finally came back, the very first thing, was not help me or thank God or get me out of here. The first thing Dana Reyes said to the man who'd come back for her was, "The 4th one ran fast. I think there's more in the wadi. Tell the bird to watch the wadi." Still working. Still on the board. Still spending her coins on everyone but herself. They got her down. It took the rest of the night and into the gray of the morning for men carrying her in a litter improvised from rifles and jackets, while the other two and Dana herself, propped up and still listening, watched the slope and the wadi behind them, and the storm broke just before dawn the way the file said it would. And a helicopter came up the valley in the first clean light and took her off the mountain, and that's where the after-action report picks her up, that flat little sentence, subsequently recovered, as though she'd been a duffel bag in a snowbank instead of the reason 6 men were alive to recover her. She lost the hearing in that left ear for good. The hyperacusis in the right one, the gift that wasn't a gift, the wound that turned into an edge. It faded over the months that followed, the way the doctors said it might, the brain settling back down, turning the volume back towards something like normal, and Dana said the strangest thing about that to the one person she ever really talked to about that night, which was that she missed it. Not the pain of it, not the assault of an ordinary kitchen sounding like a battlefield, but the clarity, the sense she'd had for 100 minutes of hearing the truth of the world with nothing left out. And she said she understood for the first time why blind people sometimes say they can hear the shape of a room, and she said it had felt, on the worst night of her life, like being briefly, terribly awake in a way she'd never been before, and would never be again. The leg healed wrong the first time, and they had to go back in, and the rib knitted, and she walked again, and she even ran again after a fashion, with a hitch in her own stride now, a limp not so different from the limping man's, and she said that too was a thing she turned over in the dark, that she'd marked a man as easy prey for the same wound she now carried herself, and that the mountain had a way of evening its accounts. Cole put her in for a decoration, and the citation, when it finally came through all the channels that such things crawl through, used careful words. Words like exposed herself to enemy fire and directed friendly elements, and with complete disregard for her own safety. And those words are true the way the after-action report is true, which is to say they're accurate and they're empty. They're the bones with all the life scraped off. Because nowhere in the citation does it say that she crawled 8 feet across open snow for 7 minutes to reach a radio she thought was dead. Nowhere does it say she lay in the dark and let the most dangerous man on the mountain hunt her closer and closer on purpose, because every meter he came toward her was a meter away from her friends. Nowhere does it say that the whole thing turned on 3 words spoken into a torn radio by a woman who'd already decided she was going to die. Take him now. 3 words that saved 6 lives and cost her the last thing she had left to bargain with. Citations can't hold that. No piece of paper can. That's why I'm up here on this porch telling you instead. I went looking, the way I do, for what happened to her after, because that's always the part that matters most to me, and it's always the part the records care about least. She didn't stay in. The leg and the ear together meant the medical board had thoughts about her fitness, and there was a long ugly fight about that the way there always is. A woman who'd just saved 6 men having to argue with the system about whether she was still worth keeping, and she got tired of arguing, and she got out, and the last clear thing I could find on her was years later, and a long way from any mountain. She teaches now. That's the thing. Of all the things she could have done, she teaches, and not what you'd guess, not tactics, not survival, not any of the hard skills the Corps spent 8 years pouring into her. She teaches kids. Deaf kids, and hard of hearing kids, and kids with the kind of injuries she has, the partial loss, the ringing world, and she teaches them, more than anything, how to listen with what they've got left, how to stop mourning the ear that's gone and start using the one that isn't, how to pull the signal out of the noise, how to read a room you can't fully hear, how to find the one voice that matters in the roar of all the others, how to turn the thing the world calls a disability into the thing that makes you, on the right night, in the right dark, the most awake person in it. And I think about that, friend. I think about it a lot on this porch, with the rain coming down the way it's coming down tonight. Because the easy version of this story, the trailer version, is the wounded girl who could hear ghosts, the miracle on the mountain, and I told you at the start that it wasn't that, and it isn't. The true version is harder, and it's better. The true version is a woman who got hurt, badly, in a way that took something from her she'll never get back, and who did not get to choose whether she got hurt. None of us do, and who got to choose only one thing, the same thing all of us get to choose, which is what she did with the hearing she had left. She could have used it to listen for her own death coming. She used it to keep 7 other people alive. And then, when the war was over and the edge had dulled and the gift had faded back into a plain old injury she'd carried the rest of her days, she took the one true thing the mountain had taught her, which was how to listen, and she spent the rest of her life giving it away to children who needed it. That's not magic. I'll say it one more time because it's the whole point. It's not magic. It's a wound, and what a person decides to do with one. And every one of us is carrying one, some quiet thing the world took out of us that we didn't get a vote on, a dead ear of our own, and the only question that was ever ours to answer is the one Dana Reyes answered in the snow with her hand flat on a pistol she never drew. Not why did this happen to me? The mountain doesn't answer that one, and neither does the rain. Just, what can I still hear? And who can I keep alive with it? The rain's easing up now. That's the end of hers. Dana Reyes, Corporal, the dead woman who could hear, the bait that became the gun, the listener who spends her days now teaching children how to find the one voice that matters in all the noise. If this one got into you the way it got into me, do me that one favor I asked for back at the start. Subscribe. Stay a while. There's another file on the table next to my chair. Another woman, another worse night, another quiet thing nobody put in the report. There's always another one. And I'll be right here on this porch when the rain comes back, ready to read it slow. Good night, friend. Sleep with both ears, if you've got them. There's somebody out there learning to do it with one.